We've received a lot of questions about what Hamas is and why it was created. The term Hamas is actually an Arabic acronym. It translates to the Islamic Resistance Movement.
It's an organization that is dedicated to Islamist principles and the creation of a state ruled by Islam.
Within the last decade, Canada, the US, the UK, Israel, and other countries have all designated Hamas as a terrorist organization, in part because of its violent tactics and ideology, such as its use of suicide bombers. Several Hamas officials have said the group's goal is to eradicate Israel and establish an Islamic state in historic Palestine. We'll unpack that history a little later. First, Hamas emerged as a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood in the 1980s. The Muslim Brotherhood was formed in 1928 in Egypt and also advocates an Islamist political ideology.
Muslim Brotherhood is a conservative Islamist group, usually very anti-left, an opponent of a lot of socialist organizations in the Arab world.
Prior to Hamas's creation, though, there was a small group of Muslim Brotherhood members, mostly in Gaza, who followed this ideology. But they weren't yet involved in the movement to liberate Palestinians. That movement was mostly led by secular groups that were jointly known as the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or the PLO.
The PLO was the umbrella under which all of the main Palestinian groups operated for decades. It was led by Yasser Arafat.
And in the 1960s, the PLO stated in its charter that Palestine should be established as an Arab state, and Zionists should be driven out of the region. While the PLO was at odds with Israel in trying to achieve these goals, members of the Muslim Brotherhood in Gaza appeared to be focusing on religious and charitable activities.
For that reason, they were aided by Israel as sort of a counterbalance against the leadership of the PLO. But in December 1987, they take this leap of wanting to find a militant organization. So a meeting in the house of Sheikh Ahmad Yassin.
And Yassin founded Hamas in 1987 during the First Intifada. That was a Palestinian uprising throughout the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. It lasted until the early 1990s. It was then that Hamas challenged the secular group, the PLO, and called for in its 1988 charter the obliteration of Israel and the creation of an Islamist state of Palestine through violent means. Something that Hamas officials say they're still trying to achieve during this ongoing war. In the late 80s, the PLO said they were willing to negotiate with Israel. First by acknowledging the state of Palestine, then by acknowledging the state of Israel. This started the peace process known as the Oslo Accords, which were signed in 1993 and 1995 and created the Palestinian Authority, the political arm of the PLO. Under that deal, the Palestinian Authority was first given limited control in Gaza and the West Bank to govern. That control was broken down into 3 areas. There was also a plan to start the formation of a Palestinian state alongside Israel, known as the two-state solution, but it was never realized. And Hamas did not support this two-state solution. This historian says throughout the 1990s, Hamas did everything they could to disrupt the peace process. Israel clamped down on Palestinian protests, and civilians were killed on both sides of the conflict, all of which inflamed anger in the territories and led to the Second Intifada.
Hamas, backed by Islamic Republic of Iran, together with Palestinian Islamic Jihad, they have a very important role in this.
In 2004, Arafat died, and 2 years later, Palestinian elections took place both in the West Bank and Gaza. The PLO was unpopular because it hadn't followed through with the peace process. It was also accused of being corrupt. Hamas won the most seats by a small margin, beating out the rival, the PLO-affiliated Fatah party. By 2007, Hamas broke with Fatah and the PLO altogether and seized unilateral control of Gaza, leaving Fatah in power in the West Bank. This led Israel, with the help of Egypt, to impose wide-ranging restrictions on the movement of people and goods in and out of Gaza. Israel also built a 65-kilometer security barrier around Gaza. It included radar systems, maritime sensors, and underground sensors to detect militant tunnels. The combination of the barrier and the blockade have led many to describe Gaza as an open-air prison, and there have been no elections in Gaza since then. There are 2 main groups that govern Palestinians: the Palestinian Authority, which operates in the West Bank, and Hamas, which governs in Gaza and also has an armed wing called the Al-Qassam Brigade. In 2017, Hamas rewrote its 1988 charter and softened some of its language, but Azizi says it still holds some anti-Semitic views and advocates for violence to achieve its goals.
Hamas has always had different wings with widely stated different goals. That's what it makes it a hard organization to understand sometimes.
Today, Hamas still operates out of Gaza, but also has leaders living in Qatar and Lebanon.
There is a distinction between the political leadership outside Gaza. The attack, by all accounts, was organized solely by those inside. The politicians outside are in some ways playing catch-up.
Since the surprise attacks on October 7th in Israel, a Hamas official said in an interview on Lebanon's LBC TV that the group will repeat the attack time and again until Israel is annihilated. His statement was translated by the Middle East Media Research Institute. And in another more recent interview with the New York Times, a Hamas member said, Hamas's goal is not to run Gaza and to bring it water and electricity and such. He went on to say that the Hamas resistance woke the world up from its deep sleep. Share your questions with with us in the comments.